Am popeth amnesi. Rwy'n hiraethu am adrau, roedd eisiau yno. Rwy'n hiraethu am adrau, rwy eisiau yno.
So today we're just going to do an information sharing about the Greek Magickal Papyri, of which there are a lot. Somebody said to me today on one of the forums, which one? All of them. So we're going to do a brief overview of what they are. The Greek Magickal Papyri that we have collected, like this is my go-to one, but this is written by a gentleman called Hans-Dieter Beetz, right? And Beetz, I think is the correct German pronunciation of it. But it is a collection, and what's in the collection is up to his discretion what he's put in there. So we're going to go over what the different collections are, what the time periods were, and how important the Greek Magickal Papyri actually was to Aleister Crowley and the formation of Helena and a lot of the associated rituals and texts that came out of that. I've been working myself for many years with this series that we do from the Greek Magickal Papyrus. We actually did a Hemetic series several years ago here in Brisbane, Sydney and in Melbourne of 10 Hemetic rituals that we based out of the Greek Magickal Papyrus, using it as an initiation to each of the deities of those spheres. So just to bring everybody up to speed, do we have a basic idea what Hemetic magic is? Hemetic magic, for those that are just looking at me a little bit, is basically the magic that comes out of an era, right? And the era is, if you think the time of Alexander the Great, it was a great melting pot of cultures. Got a few more coming in.
You mean it's from a particular era,
Yes.
or it's from different eras?
You might want to grab another chair.
Is that the ultimate period? Ultimate?
Yes, it's Silent P. Yeah, so,
There's two chairs over here.
Ptolemy was one of the generals of Alexander who took over rule of Egypt in that area. Yeah, so the Hemetic magic basically is a blend of different magics together, right? But it very much is about planetary magic as well. So we actually did a series of invocations from this that was based on getting to know those planetary personalities, right, that are divine, that are deities. So that was my introduction to the Greek Magickal Papyri. The way that I began using it was I started forming these rituals myself from a Tibetan perspective, because I had a training in Tibetan shamanism, and Tibetan shamanism is very planetary based. It's very much on what's happening in the sky right now. So, and planets are very interestingly different to everything else in the sky. They're the wanderers, they do move through the sky. But they are very much a part of us. They influence us. Their magnetic pull on us shows us the different potentials that we have available. But they have a personality as well. So I started working on this, and there was a lovely gentleman who used to be part of the OTO from Melbourne called Barrington. Barrington Vincent Showman. So anybody, the old-time members from down there might know him. Barrington said to me, "Oh, Shé, some of the stuff you're doing is very much like out of the Greek Magickal Papyri." And we'll show later how that cultural melting pot we were talking about also ended up in there as well. Anyway, so we'll probably delay as much as we can to start off with. I know there is a couple more people coming, so I'm just going to jump in and see how we go from here. Alright, so occultists and Masons claim that ancient Egyptian magic is the primary source for Western magic. Now, Egyptian spelled that way with the A and the E together signifies ancient Egyptian stuff as opposed to the modern day state of Egypt that we have today. Neoplatonic stuff is a part of this, but Hemetic magic, and if we have a look at Hemetic magic, you can also divide that up into several different things as well, several different genres as well. The magic that I find out of this is what they would have called low magic. In other words, it was dealing with the day-to-day concerns of people that were residents of this area of Egypt, but also Greece. Right? The actual area that this magic covered was quite vast, as opposed to the high magic rituals. And the high magic rituals were basically the magic of the Pharaohs. Right? The magic of the Pharaohs was a different set of magic again. So if you can imagine these texts that are in the Greek Magickal Papyri were for want of a better word, a book of shadows that each of these little door-to-door priests used to have. And they used to go door-to-door, essentially, and go, do you need anything done magically? Can we help you with anything? Or they would be sought out for their assistance with day-to-day problems that people had. Whereas the actual priesthood that we see in the history books was something quite different. It was set up to support the pharaohs themselves. And the pharaohs were really important because their magic was to make sure that Egypt flooded every year, that the Nile flooded, that it stayed fertile, that they stayed wealthy, that they stayed at peace with their neighbours. That was what the magic of the pharaohs was for. We weren't sure whether or not we should wait for you guys.
Literally looked at 8 o'clock this morning.
Oh,
Sorry, apologies.
no, that's all right. Look, I've just set up as best I can. I've done anything.
What else can you do?
Yeah. All right. So, yeah. If you want to, I can stand up. Do you want to?
No.
Stay there. Carry on. Pretend like it.
All right. I think there's one more person to come. Okay. So, this is what we're talking about. This is different magics for different purposes. And also what they've tried to do with the Greek Magickal Papyri is divide them up into different magics for different purposes as well. So that is an example of one of the papyri. This lady's not looking great. They contain formula, they contain hymns, they contain ceremonies and rituals. Right? This particular piece is very interesting. It's got lots of diagrams on it, and it was a 2.5 metre long piece of papyrus. Right? Now these drawings on there would be drawings of deities, drawings of what to do. So that it was very step by step, and I just can't find any better analogy for these than the modern day book of shadows. You know, how you go, okay, this works for me, so I'll do this. It was scientific in that these guys were not going to do things that didn't work for them. It was very multicultural because they would steal from any culture, any religion, anything that worked for them. And we'll see how many different cultures actually went into this. So just for people that don't know, do most of us understand what papyrus is? It was actually paper that was made from the papyrus plant. There's actually two kinds of papyrus plant. One also has a big white fluffy thing on it, and the big white fluffy thing actually made the better paper. But they would unroll it, quite literally just cut off the stalk, and you find the stalk has rolls of layers of cells. And they would put them across at 90 degrees, hammer them together, and then they polished it. And it was ready to be used. So it was quite an art of paper making in those days. But they used a completely renewable source that the Nile was lined with. What is amazing about the papyrus is that these magical papyri have survived 2,000 years being based on something that is so organic. Right? A lot of papyruses that we have in the museums today have only survived in very fragmentary bits and pieces. But you'll see somebody holding up one of the papyrus, there's a picture later. It is amazing that these have actually survived. A lot of them were actually buried in the tombs of the practitioners, and some of them were actually inscribed on lead and rolled up with lead as well. But Egyptians and Egyptian magical culture was very, very good at preserving things, monuments and those sorts of things. It's really, it astounds me. Has anyone heard about the Gospel hieroglyphs? I've been there. They actually do exist, and they can't be faked. We've got a wall that's like 40 feet tall with hieroglyphs all the way up. There's a couple of spots on there where people have tried to fake a couple, and it's very obvious that they are fakes. But one of the main ingredients in the Egyptian mummification process was eucalyptus. Right? And there's only one source in the ancient world of eucalyptus, and that was Australia. They didn't grow eucalyptuses anywhere else in the world. They do now. You can see eucalyptuses growing in a lot of different places now. Back then they didn't. But Egypt, and then Egypt following Alexander the Great, was one of these cultures that travelled a lot. They had huge commerce over a vast section of the globe. Right? And we've got to really start thinking outside the box when we start thinking about this culture, because Western history is based on what we know in the West, right? Where this is Middle Eastern, which is a lot older than what we had. And a lot of our Western history and our Western magical traditions are broken, right? And there's been a concerted effort over the last 200 years to get rid of them as well. But these are unbroken traditions, right? It died out. But we'll show you there are places where remnants of it have actually survived as a living tradition to this day. Right. So the topics covered, and the short name for the Greek Magickal Papyrus is the PGM. So you don't want to say Greek Magickal Papyrus all the time, it's the Papyrus, Greek Magick. Right. So the very step by step, do this, get this result. Right? And if they were selling their magics and they didn't get a result, then they didn't get work. So it was very scientific in that way, and that the steps were repeatable. Right? We had the divinations, lamens, in other words, how to make these things that you would wear with different insignia on it, different formula on it to produce results, diagrams, initiatory rites, rites for immortality, love spells, and healing rites. There's quite a lot of history contained in this. The Leiden Papyrus is probably a little bit more scientific. It was more about metallurgy, it was more about alchemy than the other papyrus were about spells. In those days, alchemy, magic, and science were not separate. They were all part of the one art. The word chemist today comes from alchemy, right? And the word alchemy comes from the Egyptian word for the soil that would flood up from the Nile each year, which was chem, right? So these substances, these black substances, chem meaning dark or black, right? So today it's like tracing the roots of the word psychic. It's in psychiatry, it's in all these, our psyche. But these were all one. Science and magic was seen as one. And indeed, magic really is a science that people just don't understand yet. To it, we have our dark energy and our dark matter. Our scientists in Australia, in Coonabarabran, were the ones that were actually able to confirm that dark matter and dark energy existed. And now we find that the alchemists were right, because they were always talking about this quintessence that was 90% of everything around us. And now we know scientifically that they've rediscovered what the alchemists already knew. But they've been able to put it in Western terms that our Western scientists can accept. It's very interesting when you go to something like the Vedas. The Vedas are very scientific documents in a lot of times, but they're written in allegory. But Western science also has its allegories as well. And a lot of people don't realise how much allegory there is in our Western science. I mean, if you were to look at a molecule under a microscope, are you going to see little red balls and little blue balls joined by straws? But we accept that symbol means a molecule of matter. Right? Whereas if you showed that to a form of science that didn't know it, they're going, what are these simpletons talking about? It's so primitive. But we recognise this allegory. The other one is the double helix, of DNA. I put some photos up on my Facebook page the other day of DNA. And again, that's another allegory. You know, our DNA actually does look like a double helix. It's little white squidgy things. Right? They correspond, right? And it does twist around, but they correspond to each other, but they don't line up perfectly with little lines in between. Right? That we accept that allegory to explain what our DNA is, even though it's not exactly. So what we're dealing with a lot of ancient magic is allegory, right? That actually is explaining things that are quite scientific, especially when you start to get into this information about our planets, our planetary orbits. You've got to understand that around this time, the Greeks had already measured the circumference of the Earth. You know, Euclid had already stated the geometry of elliptic fields and how our planets moved in elliptic orbits around our sun. Right? But then we have the Dark Ages, where Christianity took over and said, no, that science contradicts the Bible, so it must be wrong. So science actually went backwards for about 1,500 years during that period of time. Right? I mean, we even have Epicurus telling us what an atom is, you know, at this time. This is all around this time. So their science was very advanced at this stage compared to the stuff we're just getting back to today. Hemetic Correspondences. A lot of magic these days is based on our Hemetic Correspondences. Our 7 planets with our 7 colours and our 7 notes and our 7 perfume. A lot of this comes from the Leiden Papyrus. So magically, that's what the Leiden Papyrus is very useful for. It also gives us the secret names of plants. So if we look at a thing called a plant code that we actually get from that, you know, when we hear Macbeth, at the start of Macbeth, you know, double, eye of newt and tongue of dog, they're actually talking about plants. They're not actually talking about the tongue of a dog, no more than a botanist is actually talking about a kangaroo's paw when they're talking about a plant, or dragon's blood. We're not going to go and get a little dragon and get its blood.
Sorry, is this all in that book there?
It is, but you've got to search for it. I think this is going to be, I actually wrote a book on this, but my wonderful partner at the time actually stole it and brought it out under his name, Much Change. And it's been one of those things I put down and went, I should write this, I should write another book and bring it out under my name, but every time I do, it's real bad taste comes up in my mouth. So, yeah, I will eventually get around to writing another book on this. And a documentation of the group that we had. We had 40 people in Brisbane, about 20 people in Sydney, and about 40 in Melbourne that used to do these ceremonies with us. And the amazing results that they got, you know, looking for specific results in connecting with them. Yeah. But so that gives you an idea of what these plants actually are. And this little thing here is directly from the Leiden Papyrus. It tells you what the plant names are and what they're
really
actually
fun when you read it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you can see a bull semen. It's a little white flower. So that in those days, they were describing something that, you know, they weren't as shy about things as what we were. We know that clover and portulaca is sacred to Aries, and the semen of Aries is clover, of course. You know? So those sorts of things. Sorry, what did you say?
I was just saying hematite. They were snake.
Yeah. Yeah, they weren't quite big, and there were some animal products used, but they were very respectful of animals. So, and it's interesting, you speak to people like, I saw, what's his name? The guy that we're listening to reading Sherlock Holmes at the moment, I'm talking about, what's his name?
Stephen Fry.
Stephen Fry. Yeah, he, on QI, was saying how ridiculous the papyrus was, because they were using these things in medicine. And we're going, but that's a plant, it's a herb, they're using a herb to heal. And he was saying that it was actual animal semen and things like that. Oh. No, I don't think so. No, Stephen, it's really not. So even sometimes very intelligent people get things very wrong. So The use of specific magical language in these texts is called the voices magic, right? So this is where Barrington started to tell me that he thought this, what I was doing was very similar to Greek papyrus. And you'll find in the Greek papyrus there's these long strings of vowels, you know, that A, E, I, and you'll hear some people when they do the rituals from this, they go A, E, I, but in the Tibetan, like, I don't know if anybody's ever heard harmonic throat singing, right? So, and that's basically what they're talking about, right? Because when you do the harmonics, it actually opens up this portal. So there are rituals for opening and closing. So we put together an opening and closing that actually use the 7 vowel sounds. And there is actually, anybody who studied phonetics knows there's a lot more than 7 vowel sounds. And there's a lot more than 7 planets as well, but we're using the 7 basic ones, right? So we go something like, so I haven't warmed up my voice this morning, just let me take the breath and see if I can do this for you. So that's sort of through A, E, I, O, U. So you could hear those little bell-like tones come over, and they come out of nowhere, right? And it's so much better. Like if you use that in ritual, you'll find that the portals to the other dimensions that you want to bring in, the always to spirit, just fly open. And that was the big thing that Barrington and I was so excited about. He's going, oh my God, that's this. That's the Greek Magickal Papyrus. So that's when I started to look at this much, much more closely. And anybody that knows me knows that I'm absolute Pythagoras nut. You know, you could call somebody magic a fan. I'm a Pythagoras fan.
What is it before? It's like a representation of the harmonic sequence. So it's a representation of the harmonic sequence. Like you're making a low note and then by changing the vowel, a higher harmonics coming.
Okay, so the way the harmonics.
Like that, so there's like 2 notes and that's.
Well, let's all give this a go.
Is this like the Goyeta lux? The Goyeta lux, is that the same sort of thing?
I don't know so much where to go to, but I know that, like, throat singing through the Sherpas, through that area, everybody does it. What's in the yellow hats? The yellow hats do the deep throat singing where it sounds like they really need to go to the toilet.
Yeah, that was like the Goyeta.
Yeah, and there was a gentleman that used to open the Mind Body Spirit Festival, and we go, oh my God, do you relax there, quick? Because it just sounds, but he's after one range there, and it's not, it doesn't actually matter what note you do it in. You can do it in any note at all. But vowels are about the shape of your mouth, right? Because O-S-T, but you can't go A, because you've got in that cavity of your mouth. But what the harmonic does is actually opens it up in a specific way. So you can do it on any note at all, as long as it's just a pure single note. But it's changing your mouth, the shape of your mouth around that note is the way it's achieved. So if I was going to do, I find it easy to start with E, and it's surprising, a lot of them, I know we've got A written up here, but you'll find a lot of them actually do start with E when you start to have a look through the Greek Magickal Papyrus. But if you start with E, because it's very wide, horizontal, E, so you're changing around there, and even though I was more concentrating on the shape, you can still see get the bell come over the top. Yeah. Do you want to give it a go? You can, you want? Yeah. Alright, so we'll just warm up a little bit just by making it pure tone. Just go. It doesn't upset the Alright, so now we're just changing our start from E, and what you're going to go is E, yeah. Just try and follow me. I had never stopped and thought about it. Okay. Yeah, and then you go It's like almost like an R and back to E again. Okay? Yeah, that last D, the tongue sort of comes right up on the top of the teeth there. But I've got some nice little tones over here. It was working. It's definitely a technique, like all magical techniques, you've got to practice them. Right? So next time you're in the shower or locked in the car, in traffic, it's good to have a good practice of that. Right? And you will start to find when you are doing, if you open up your ceremonies with that an invitation to do that, and you will immediately be opening up this portal for spirit to come in. And so they're not just, mindless strings of vowels in the Greek Magickal Papyrus. It's actually a musical invocation. Pythagoras, all of his rituals start off with a salute to the sun, an invocation to the sun, because he spent time in India and learned a lot of Vedic techniques. Vedic mathematics is what he actually brought back to the West.
Egypt as well, wasn't it? Egypt as well.
Yeah, he did a tour. But the Song to the Sun was also done in Egypt every morning. And the Song to the Sun we know today as Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. That's the ancient Egyptian invocation to the sun, which has remained in our musical practices. Yeah. And as the sun moves through a degree on the horizon, we change to and each one of those are a god name. Right?
So 7 modes, I call it.
That palindrome there, how do you begin to break that up to pronounce that? Like, is there anything on like YouTube or anything like to help you master something like that?
The fourth one down, the long one.
Yeah.
We used to break it into words, and indeed, like to have a long string that long. But you'll understand as we go through, it's actually god names. And you can start to see the god names as you go through. Yeah, and you're actually breaking it in. But they didn't really have punctuation as we have it today either. So they didn't have capitals, full stops, So they would just run something together like that. Right. So this is the Bactrian kingdoms. Right. So Alexander the Great, as we know, he started over New Greece, Medo-Persian Empire. The Ptolemaic Empire was over here around Egypt, and he went all the way through and conquered right down almost to the Indus River there. And his wife Roxanne was actually Bactrian, so he brought her back from this area. And with that came a huge trade in ideas. Right? So of course, why would he include philosophy and magic and all of this from every other culture except from Asia? Of course he included that in what he had there as well. So this idea of the throat singing that still exists today, that being included in magic, the invocation to spirit, the days of the week correspond so closely to our Western days of the week. They've still got their systems of sevens. There's so many correspondences to the traditional magic of this area to what we do in Western magic today, except they didn't have a dark ages. They didn't have anybody cut their tradition off. The Buddhists did pay to a lot of their indigenous shamanic practices. The Buddhists actually did have their own witch hunts over there. But in the remote areas, these traditions just continued, and the Sherpas certainly weren't going to give up any of their indigenous traditions as well. So it did manage to survive much better than what it survived over in the West. The bonded universe square is directly taken out of the Greek Magickal Papyrus. Sorry, I haven't put the reference down here for it. But the bond of the universe there's not a lot of explanation given as to why that lamen, and that was actually to be inscribed and worn, was called the bond of the universe. Every spiritual tradition talks about sound being the first creation. In the Bible, we have in the beginning, John 1, the Word was, and the Word was with God.
Even science.
Yeah, Big Bang. And we have in the Vedas, Brahman uttered the first word, and it was Gayatri, and she was born. Wisdom was born into the world, and from her all of creation came forth. So this is those vowel sounds being the source of creation. Right, so again, literally from there. So the Greek Magickal Papyrus also gives us how to pronounce them, so that they aren't just, a mindless string of vowels. It literally says A alpha with the mouth open, undulating like a wave, right, which is what we just did. The O succinctly. And what we've got is the semantics over there. So semantics is where you turn sound into an image. So literally, if you put a piece of paper on a speaker, right, and then play music through a speaker, you get shapes, right? And these different vowel sounds produce different shapes, including the flower of life. So as I was saying before, not only did different cultures run through that area, but in the Greek Magickal Papyrus in ancient Greco-Roman Egypt, we have a blend of cultures from Babylon, Egyptian, we have Hebrew references, as well as Western Greek references as well. There is a lot of Christianity in there as well, and Christianity came in the later periods. So, but they just took anything that worked. I was having a discussion the other day about somebody in the spiritualist church that said that they didn't let magic in the church because it wasn't Christian. Right, and I'm going, you do realise there's a whole body of Christian magic that you're just not aware of, right? And but I think the World Spiritualist Church in Australia is going to go through a falling apart and a re-putting back together at the moment, because there's the tighter you try and control something, the more it's going to fall apart. So they're all falling apart, falling away from them at the moment because they're being too tightly controlled. So they also shared their gods, and they saw correspondences between their gods as well. So the gods weren't, you didn't just have Isis in Egypt, or you didn't just have Horus, right? And the other thing is too, how ideas, and I've always liked that picture because it's got Shé on the chest. That's actually, but that's how you write Set in the Greek Magickal Papyrus. But in the Greek Magickal Papyrus, Set is not evil. Set is one of the most invoked deities. He's the most helpful, right? Even if you look at the magical tradition of the Pharaohs in Egypt, Set was invoked if they needed help. He was the god that allowed Ra to be born every morning anew, because he would guard the solar bark as it went through the underworld to stop Apep eating it. He was the champion, the hero, the one that was needed. So if you need a champion and a hero in magic, you invoke Set. Right, so he was. It's really interesting because this actually shows the personalities of the deities as they were at that snapshot in time. These days, with the Basilian culture that goes around, everybody wants to equate him with Satan because of one paper that was written by somebody in the university. But that's not actually how they saw him. The Egyptians did see him as evil. He was necessary. He was just over-ambitious, and he killed his brother.
Have you seen the new mummy?
Yes. I know, it's very disappointing. I mean, they really muck up all the mythology in that. But the movie's good fun.
Yeah.
And the other thing is too, and this is a really interesting quote by about the papyrus, is the moon is actually very much portrayed the way that she was in the Helius Maleficarum, as the god of the witches. She's actually portrayed as something that could be dark and dreadful. To the point where modern translators, as you can see there, are not sure whether or not to include it because it might upset the Wiccans too much. Right?
Anything upsets me. Sorry.
Yeah. So she was actually quite a dark and negative goddess according to the papyrus as well. So you get to see that. But this is what I was talking about before. We also have our composite deities. So this is one called Helius Chorus. It's another chorus that corresponds to the god Helios. Helios is Apollo, sun god. But some of the Greek Magickal Papyrus, or some of what we have today, that has explained the Greek Magickal Papyrus, was preserved in lead, amulets, tablets, lead scrolls. And this is a lead amulet where you've got this composite god, where they've seen that, you know, not only are they enough alike, but also, hey, we need something done, so we're going to put these two gods together and make one deity out of it. So, the Daemon of the sleepless fire. It's very interesting about that. Like, we'll go more into the Daemons at the moment, because the Daemons are constantly invoked in there. But we have a theurgia. Theurgia is where you self-identify. So not only do you blend the gods together, you blend yourself with the gods. And a lot in the Greek Magickal Papyrus, you can look at it like, oh, they're just pretending to be a deity. But you can look at it like, well, if you want to be whole and healed from this particular thing, then you're going to take on this divine aspect. And this divine aspect, of course, can't be sick. Like, a lot of people ask Set for health and strength. You know, heal this, heal that. Is God healing? Right? Why? Because he was so vigorous and so strong and so manly. You know, you take on this energy and you look for this aspect of this energy within yourself. Right? Just the same way you would in voodoo. Right? In voodoo, you invoke deity to come into you. Right? And you put all that effort into the ceremony for an hour, and you might have a moment of possession. Well, this is the same similar sort of thing. You're actually inviting that energy of the deity within yourself. It's not going to last forever, but hopefully it will last long enough to do the job that you need it to do. And with our funerary texts, you know, our coffin texts, our pyramid texts, we can certainly see that they did that, not just with the pharaohs, but also with the other mummies. Right? Has anybody been to the Nicholas Museum in Sydney, in the University of Sydney Museum? There, great Egyptian collection. We've got a couple of mummies with the sarcophagus is open. Yeah, and they've got all of the writing on the lid. You can see all of the hieroglyphs on the lid of the coffins. And it's a really good collection, the Nicholas collection. So if you get time if you're in Sydney, go and have a look. It's really lovely. Right, now they also do a thing called histriola. Right? And histriola is where they take the story arc of a deity, right? And then they'll incorporate that into the magic that they're doing, or they want to incorporate that for the person they're doing the spell for. So one of the common ones is with the love spells in there. They take the story arc of Aphrodite and I'm having a name thing today. Adonis, Aphrodite and Adonis. The story arc of Aphrodite and Adonis is repeated. Right? And they do one love spell where they repeat that story arc, and then they say, okay, now Aphrodite, if you don't grant this to me, you're never going to get Adonis back. We're going to keep him chained. We're going to keep him bound. We're not going to release him to you unless you grant this person what they want in life. So they use that story arc in a very creative way in all of the spells as well. It also allows you to get to understand the spirit that is that personality behind that, what we come to think of as a deity, right? And how to invoke them, how to engage them. Right? So there's a papyrus being held up. So, and to think that that's a 2,000-year-old piece of paper made out of papyrus, that's pretty amazing that these magical, it's magic that they've been preserved so well. Right. So the compilation and translation is really interesting for us to have a look at, especially with regard to Thelema, right? Because there's some very interesting dates that come up that correspond to some Thelemic dates as well. So they very first came to light, as we would know them today, as the Greek Magickal Papyrus, when one of the ambassadors over there came up with 6 papyrus texts from Thebes, and he sold them at a very good price to one of the museums. The museum wasn't sure that they were genuine because they were in such good condition, but they have since later been absolutely confirmed to be genuine. After that, there was a rush. Right? So the British Museum wanted some, the French Museum wanted some. So we sort of had them going, all these texts going in different directions. So they were taken out of excavated graves, as I said before, and they just seemed to go in different directions.
Wouldn't the texts themselves, as they're being dispersed that way, wouldn't they be making up a story collectively? And have they actually looked at putting them together?
Yeah, well, this is what we're saying here. You know, there was an effort made, you know, to start to bring them back together. And the first collection was published in 1885, right, in Greek, and then we had a translation in Latin later. Right, and these volumes were slowly brought out. There was a volume on a collection of some of the texts here, and there was a collection. That's why we have the Leyden collection. That's why we have this collection. That's why we have that collection. But then we get to and this collection. This is probably the most recent. He's so good. You know, Germans are just so pedantic about. I was going to say animal retentive motion. We have to put in Germans here, but they're so pedantic about making sure they get everything right. And it's such a good translation.
Can I ask a good question? Like in the Hindu tradition of the Pharaohs, what would be the easiest comprehensible Greek or Western equivalent of the way they lay out the phonemes in the alphabet? Ha, Ra, Ka, all these sorts of things.
Look, I can't go beyond this translation. Just in like common
so
English.
What I'm commenting is in there.
Yeah. There's obviously stuff that's been left out of this, and there was a problem with one of the translations was actually in a museum in France, and he was doing a translation over there, and it burnt down, and his actual translation of it burnt down with it, and that was the best translation. So all that survived with that really good translation that ended up as this one was fragments with all these other universities being confirmed, getting academic confirmation of it. So when that translation burnt and that gentleman was killed, they actually started to put them back together. And this is the English translation of that one that's arrived. So it is really a shame that Axwell couldn't finish that work that he was doing, because that would have been the definitive work. But this is probably the next best thing he's going to get. Yeah. So we realised that it did influence Aleister Crowley, but there's a very interesting date here. That the translation, for the release date of the Hemetic Magickal Papyrus of London, Leyden in 3 volumes, was in 1904, early 1904. And then we have, in 1904, as we know, Aleister and Rose ended up over in Egypt for their honeymoon. And they were performing rituals in the pyramids in different places, right? And of course the main ritual that they did there resulted in the law being brought forth. Right? The Bornless Invocation he speaks about in his diaries being performed on the 16th of March, which resulted in Rose entering into a trance, right? And then on the 20th the dictation started to come. Right? Now, the Bornless Invocation is actually from the Greek Magickal Papyrus. So it's not a big jump to see that he's taken the 1904 translation, right, and he's gone and done this Bornless Invocation. Now, it doesn't call it the Bornless Invocation in here. What it calls it is the Headless Invocation. So we're invoking the headless one. Right? And there's a lot written about this. You can go up and have a look at people debating about why Crowley used the Bornless Invocation, why he made it, why he called it the Bornless Invocation, not the Headless Invocation. there's a little snippet there. I summon you, O headless one, who created earth and heaven, who created night and day. I am the favour of Aeon. My name is a heart encircled by a serpent. Right? So that's a section from the headless invocation in the magical papyri here. Right? So we may know that the bornless invocation was actually put in at the start of Crowley's Goetia, his Crowley's translation of the Goetia, and he put it in this way. Right? So I was going to get someone to read it all out, but I'll spare you that. Nobody wants to read it out here. Okay, so this is how it is in the Greek Magickal Papyrus, and that's even the image that goes with it over there. So we can see if we flick backwards and forwards between the two, maybe it's not going to let me. Yeah, the barbarous names of invocation, the deity names, they're all in there. Right? Oh, no, doesn't like doing that. Okay. Right. So, and this was the most important, like arguably the most important ritual that us Crowley ever did, right? Because from that, directly from that, came the Book of the Law. Right? As a result of whatever they invoked and brought in, and it was from the Greek Magickal Papyrus.
Didn't Crowley change all the names to Egyptian names though?
No, they're in there. They're in there.
In his Goetia?
What, for the bornless ritual?
Yeah, I think he actually put Egyptian names in there.
Alright, whoops, hang on, let's go back. Well, that's the names, that's the translation that I've got. Right.
Because he uses Chem and all those things from Egypt, didn't he?
Yeah, but if you have a look, some of them are exactly, you know, these are Egyptian names, but some of them are exactly, like you see this first front of deity names. If I go back, previous. So it's, where is it? Here. See? L, the sound above, above, but it's exactly the same. Right. So I don't know if there's another translation where it's changed it again later. But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, these are, the whole point of these were that each magician used to do what worked well for him, and that became his papyri. So they would change it. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with changing some of it.
Is there any talk about having to restore the head of the first father? Like the headless one? In the Mayan tradition, the ball, and the ball coins that bowl is supposed to contain the magical skull of the first father, which has to be restored.
Oh, that's an interesting correlation. No, I haven't heard of that before. Not in here. But I think that the headless one simply is indicating that he was the first. You know? Yeah, there is lots of ways you can have a look at head. Right? In those days, there's definitely heads of families, and that wasn't actually a head, it was a person. Right? So I think there's nobody above this person, there's nobody going to head him off, or anything that's above him, or that is his head as well. So by invoking this, you know, powerful first thing, Crowley brought this in and then opened the door, got it so right, so much spirit came in. And the Holy Guardian Angels in the concept from the Mithras liturgy. Mithras liturgy forms a whole section of the Greek Magickal Papyrus by itself. There is what we know today, because you know there was a persecution of people who practiced the Mithraic tradition through the early Christian times, and they went underground, they hid, but it still got quite wiped out, so that we don't know much about the Mithras tradition other than it existed. Most of what we know about the Mithras tradition today now comes from the papyri, right, because there's a whole liturgy in there. Right? But it was very much about getting these a connection with the holy guardians, not just of an external force, but also your holy guardian within yourself, right? And it's interesting because the Mithras liturgy seems to point to the fact that there might be more than one. It's an invocation to Zeus as well. If you know how to help themselves, when they are beset by misfortune, bound by fate, humanity runs an endless cycle of sorrow, the grim companions of disunity from themselves. Father Zeus, free us from these great sufferings and show everyone. Hey, Mo, there you go. Father Zeus, free us from the great sufferings and show every one of them the genius who is their guide. Right? The whole idea of us each having an individual genius was a very Arabic tradition, and genie, we get the idea of the word genie from that we each have our own individual genie or genius. So what was the purpose of the headless ritual? It was power over all daemons, which is why Crowley put the Moors invocation at the start of his Goetia. But the prime purpose of this work is the knowledge and conversation of your holy guardian angel.
And that holy guardian angel would be personified as a lion-headed Mithric like-looking individual.
When you I believe I've contacted my holy guardian angel. When
Well,
it
I
comes
understand
to
because I've seen such a character.
yeah, I believe it looks quite different for everybody. But you having said that, mine looked very Mithric to me too. And it is very much about you connecting with this higher force that is directly part of you and interested in you, but also outside of your physical form, that connects you with the rest of everything that is. It is like our umbilical cord to the universe, right? And Crowley saw that as the most important thing, which is also echoed all the way through that Mithric liturgy as well. Right. It's not just about contacting that one daemon, your holy guardian angel. It's also about contacting a lot of other daemons as well. And I brought this along because this is a Hindu naga, right? Naga. There's no such thing as a demon in the Hindu tradition. You have asuras and nagas, right? Asuras are the divine higher energies, and the nagas are the ones that dwell in the water, right? And they are serpent-like. But when you compare it to the Greek pictures of the daemons, and we have one there that's very Greek and Egyptian there at the same time, they were considered to be beings that had a snake-like appearance as well. And were definitely not evil. They were the good guys. They were the guys that were there to watch over us and protect us. And welcome, have a look at that.
That's probably why they were modified later.
Yeah. Well, in my book, Demonology, I show how each culture becomes demonized as the deities of the previous tradition. So Christianity doing it is only doing what all the other traditions have done before it. Right. But the idea of your genie, like quite often the ancient pictures of genies are depicted as being part snake, part human as well. And it's really interesting when you see quotes from Einstein about how he came up with his ideas. He goes, because of my genius, my genie is with me. He says it several times in his quotes. So there were several classifications of daemons. There were neutral ones, there were beneficial, and there were low ones. So there were the beneficial ones were the Agatha daemons, right? The helpful ones, the helpful spirits. Right? And there were low ones, or the kako daemons. Kako literally means poo. Right? So there was the pooey ones and there was the good ones, Agatha, high over. Right?
Technical term?
Yeah, it is technical term. No, so that was what they were called. And so what we have there is a picture of the two. The top one is the Agatha daemon, which was often depicted with that eye, surprisingly. Today we have this picture of the eye being the evil eye, the protective evil eye. And the Agatha daemons, if they were male, quite often had very large penises if they didn't have snake-like bodies. So that's both from uncovered mosaics that have been in different households. So that was looking at the main Agatha Daemon protecting that household, right, and keeping away anything negative with the Kakos Daemons. But they were both useful, right, and they are used through this as well.
Do you know what that Kai seed is? I'm both KI.
No. Yeah. It's the word for Daemon. Yeah. So, see, in the Greek Magickal Papyrus, right, those whose indefatigable eyes are the sun and the moon, whose head is the heaven, whose body is the air, whose feet are the earth. The water surrounding thee is the ocean, Agatha Daemon, who created all good and nourishes and multiplies the whole inhabited world, earth, and the whole cosmos. Alright, so again, we're looking at this high being, this Agatha Daimos. So, I think we're going to be known as the chair thieves, aren't we? Alright, so there's a continuity that goes through all of these different, not only the Greek Magickal Papyrus, but also into later traditions. We see it reflected with our different deities that come in later, especially the Abrasax image at the top there, which is on the coin. This is an amulet utilising a style spell, right? So I was actually asked to analyse this one by one of the universities to tell them what I thought it was, because they told me what they thought it was, and they sent me this because I did a magazine article on the Greek Magickal Papyrus, and they sent me this and said, "What do you think of this?" All right, so we've got again this idea of the Agatha Daimos, or the the Agatha Daimos becomes the Arubis, right? So it's around everything and covering everything there. Right? And then we've got this inverted bell, right? And then two deities being invoked there to help the female. Right? This, to me, the inscription on the back, when they showed me the inscription, it looked like a key spell. A key spell. In other words, they wanted to unlock something. Especially seeing as how we've got the ram-headed Kahun on there, or they believe that this is Kahun down the bottom there, touching a key to the ambiguous. So let's have a look. Sorry. But I believe that was a fertility spell. A charm for fertility. Yeah. Well, it's just that particular, they were saying that is an alchemical vessel. But it's, alchemical vessels are usually not upside down and don't usually look woman-like. And it is a woman in the middle, right? So I believe that was actually used for a fertility spell. And you have a look in the papyrus, and there are spells in there to help people fall pregnant. So that to me looks more. Alright, so this is one that we used to use. This is one for each of the hours. You call in a different god name for each of the 12 hours of the day. Right? It's a spell to Helios, but there's lots of these that can actually be translated and used quite practically for you today. So in each of the hours, what you're doing is you're invoking a different deity in a form that can be recognised. So what we have found is that when we are doing a ritual like this, and we're calling this in at the different hours, the people in the ceremony have an experience of that deity. It may be as pictured there, in the form of a lion, right? Bao Sabolai, the ruler of time, give great success and store to give glorious victory. It may appear in the form of a lion. Other times people see it in the form of a deity or a person in front of them. And there is a personal connection that starts to be made between the deity and the person. I know they call it low magic, but gee whiz, to me, the Greek Magickal Papyrus is very much about making this connection to deity and making it really personal, right? Being able to work along with the ones that want to work along with you. This is what we used to use for our opening ritual in our series, right? Open for me, open the door. Be opened, because I am Horus the Great, Arios, Saphon, Brix, child of Osiris and Isis. Immediately, quickly. Right, and then we call 7 directions, not just 5. Right, so north, south, east, west. We call the earth, right, the midpoint, and the sky. So downwards here, being the present moment, and upwards. Right, we do, as we said before, our long strings of vowels. Right, and then we finish it off with accomplish for me whatever I ask quickly. I call your name, the greatest among gods. I call you with your vowel string, right? And it just depends what it says there, what you start with. So it starts with the I, as in the open E. So E, O, I, Yao, I, Yo. But I'm going very quickly. You take more time and allow the harmonics to come in.
How do you do the Y? How do you do the Y?
Like a ye. Yeah. So that's how we would use that, right? And that's our closing right that we would use as well. Close up for me. Close up for me. Door be locked, be barred, door, until I open you again, because I am Horus the Great, Arios, Sephon, Brix. I am child of Osiris and Iris. Immediately, quickly. Right, go again through the 7 directions, closing them up. Right. So again, using those 7 correspondences. That's another piece of papyrus. So, if you want more reading, there's plenty more there for you. So, this is a field of study that once you start and you start to use it, you're just going to keep finding it so useful. When you start to realise how many ceremonies, how many rituals have been based upon this work, right? It is I think that unless you study it, your magical knowledge is not completed, and you will never complete studying this. Right? The more you look at it, like every time I open it up, like you can see I've got my notes in it and my bookmarks in it, but every time I go back to it, I go, now I know more, because it connects up with more knowledge you've gained in the interim. It really is a vast body of magical work and knowledge that will add and aid to any other magical work that you do. Right? It's not just, as some people have said to me, oh yeah, that's all just head stuff. Right? Knowledge is power. Right? That's the bottom line. Right? And the more you know, the more you can practice to do things correctly. Right? If you want to start working with deity, it's like if you were going to ask somebody in Australian politics for a favour. Right? Before you wrote to that person, you would do a little research, right? And you'd find out what their weaknesses were, what their strong points were, how they like to be flattered, right? And then you'd write them a letter and say, Miss Gillard, you look like you've got such a lovely, long, slender neck, right? Because if you have a look at her, she's always afraid of how long her neck is. She's always trying to cover it up. You know, and I've always admired that, apart from all the work you've done. By the way, I would like some help with. Right? So you start off with it, you know, and in the end, and there's always that little thing that they put in the end there, which is not really a threat, but you know how when you write to a politician, you go, anyway, and if you didn't do this, it really would make you look bad, because if word got out to the so-and-so group, it's not really a threat, it's just a little reminder that they really should be helping you. And this is sort of how the Greek Magickal Papyrus addresses the deity, right? Work with me. It's going to be really good. Right? So it starts to make your magic really personal. And I can tell you that I've had fantastic results with it. stood on Burley Hill and we've invoked Aeon, the Mithraic deity there, with the Mithraic ceremonies directly from the Greek Magickal Papyrus. And we also timed it perfectly. We tried to work out, according to the Tibetan tradition, when it should be done, when these external influences should be. We did it during the Aqua-Eterid meteorite shower, and this energy came out of the Aqua-Eterids over the horizon, straight towards Burley Hill. And we were standing in the middle of a thunderstorm, and these perfectly parallel lightning strikes were going down in front of us. And playful energy, nothing to be afraid of, although quite a few of the ritualists did run away. But, yeah.
Except with the fellows running the Hemetic workshops down there, Francis Barton sort of workshops?
No, it wasn't him. No.
Did you find Francis Barton, do you think that'd be a useful resource?
I started to look at Francis Barton when I very first started researching Hemetic magic. And some of his exercises to develop magical abilities are brilliant, but I didn't find that a lot of his actual magic that he did worked, but his magical techniques were brilliant. I mean, obviously, if they were good, he wouldn't have been arrested by the Nazis and died in a concentration camp. So, yeah, but we did working up at Springbrook the other day, didn't we? Yeah. Do you want to tell me?
Tell us about it.
Tell us about it. I've done a lot of talking. Tell us what happened.
You're very good at talking. No, I'm just calling in some energy up at a sacred spot, a really powerful spot. Pulling in some dragon energy, and it was sounded like footsteps coming towards us. This thunderstorm just came out of the middle of nowhere and lit up the sky. It was pouring rain, and just where we were, it didn't get wet.
No, it's not rain.
And then we went to the lookout after the ritual, and the thunder and lightning was magnificent, and we were standing on the lookout. There was about 30 people, and all of a sudden there was just a huge red explosion straight in front of us. It looked like a dragon's eye with lightning coming out of it, and everyone ran. And I was just, wow, how cool is this? And I'm going, did you see that? And there was no one there. I was showing myself like, wow, did you see that? And everyone was running through the bush. So it was pretty cool.
So when
If you call it in, it'll come.
Yeah, call it in probably, and there's certainly is an egregore that comes in with this sort of magic, because it's been done for thousands and thousands of years, for about 2,000 years. And these spells are very much alive, and they have their own life force energies. You call them in, and they're like, wow, someone's calling me again.
They want to come.
Let's go pray. Yeah, so they do want to come. So anyway, so that's my end of my talk about the Greek Magickal Papyrus. Hopefully you'll find some of it useful, and you'll be able to incorporate some of it into your own ceremonies and rituals.
And you make this available in your PowerPoint?
I don't usually share my PowerPoints, no.
Why not?
But I will. Why not? Because I've had so much stuff stolen from me.
Fair.
I mean, if they're people, I'm happy for them to do more research for themselves. But like I said, I'll probably end up writing another book on this.
Or just at least references?
Yeah, you can have the references.
Susie, here's my phone, take a photo of the riffs.
I haven't got your...
So, Kenny's got it.
Thanks.
Only two minutes, like
Can always do.
So, Brad, shall I hand over to you now?
To me,
Yeah.
for,
I don't know how the form of these usually goes, so...
well, it was just really how you wanted to present it yourself. I mean, I didn't have anything to present today as such. So,
But that's it.
yep.
Okay.
I found your comments on the deck is interesting.
Is there any questions? That might be a good idea. Any questions? No?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you.
The higher and the lower, like the borders, are we talking literal borders with the natives? Or are we speaking like higher and lower borders like Julius and Oliver?
With the Nagas, literally water. And you'll find in Europe quite often there was a serpent, a female serpent spirit associated with quite a lot of holy wells and things like that as well. Okay. All right, well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
You're welcome. there any announcements you've got to make, Brad, or anything?
Nothing, no. No. Just all these people I don't know. So.
Oh, okay. So do you want to quickly go around and just say hello so we all know each other? I'm Shé.
I'm Peter.
I'm Loretta.
So, Ben, Peter,
Glenn.
Debbie.
Tiger. And Brad.
Brenton,
Oh, Fiona.
Russell,
Fran.
Debbie. And Norman.
And?
Ken.
Kitty.
Kenny in the corner.
No step to test you.
I didn't.
They do their own magic in their own way.
If you have enjoyed this video and you like the idea of making magic readily available to people in their lives for free, then perhaps you may consider supporting my work by a one-time donation or becoming a member of our Patreon community. Your support will make it possible for me to do more of this work and get that knowledge out to the public. Our Patreon members have a unique community where they can share their knowledge and wisdom, but also we will have exclusive content over there for you as well. For instance, the information that you have here in this video about Hypatia, there is a free downloadable podcast on our Patreon channel right now where you can get 3 times as much information, as well as downloading a written form in a PDF format. But if you're even considering supporting us, you have my deepest and sincerest thanks. Every blessing to you.
Ujar bu